Greetings to all of you out there. I am Samson Websi in Yaoundé with the entire production team of Political Focus with another edition of the program. And so it came to pass that over 600 participants from within Cameroon and from abroad assembled at the Yaoundé Conference Center to brainstorm on possible solutions to the bloody violence in the northwest and southwest regions. For 5 days, the delegates working in 8 commissions came out with a wide range of proposals that they believe will begin to usher in the badly needed peace that many Cameroonians have been yearning for close to 3 years now. In fact, reports from the discussions spoke of frank and sometimes emotional verbal confrontations between and among the participants, with the question of the form of the state being the most contentious issue. Participants from the northwest and southwest regions fought hard to obtain a federal arrangement without much success, yet went home with a proposed special status for the 2 regions, the content of which remains to be determined. This means that the major national dialogue may have come and gone with a lot of good intentions, yet the task of bringing back normalcy to the conflict zone remains daunting. It consists in seeing that most of the proposals are adopted and put in place rather expeditiously. And Prime Minister Joseph John Gute made no bones about the need and urgency for all hands to be on deck. For he should know more than anyone else that although many fighters are said to have laid down their guns, even more are still in the bushes. But rather luckily though, even as the major national dialogue was drawing to an end, President Paul Biya ordered the discontinuance of court proceedings against some 333 persons arrested in connection with the crisis in the northwest and southwest regions and charged before military tribunals across the country. Hopefully, these measures and many more expected after the dialogue will begin to soften the hearts of Cameroonians, thereby paving the way for a national healing process of a nation that seems to be at war with itself. Stay tuned. I will be back in a moment. Welcome back. Let's now refresh our minds on the main political news events of the week as reported by the newspapers. Charles Tembe read the newspapers and prepared the following review.
The major national dialogue that held this week is the subject of screaming banner headlines in newspapers. Cameroon Tribune reports that about 600 participants were in attendance at the dialogue chaired by Prime Minister Chief Dr. Joseph John Gute. The paper reports further that the opening ceremony saw repentant fighters singing the national anthem while their spokesman Yannick Kawa spoke about the reasons that pushed them to take up arms against the state and sued for peace. The Guardian Post says pro-regime delegates rejected proposals for a federation and forced through a special status for the northwest and southwest regions. Mutation's newspaper sees this as a second chance for decentralization, adding that proposals were also made for double nationality to be considered and for a return to the name United Republic of Cameroon. The Post described the major national dialogue as a forum of hard talk, intrigues, hypocrisy, and political posturing. Cameroon Tribune reports that there is a strong peace resolve by President Paul Biya, who on Thursday, October the 3rd, signed a decree discontinuing proceedings in military tribunals against 333 persons arrested and detained in connection with the crisis in the English-speaking regions. The paper says it is another act of appeasement by the president, which was highly applauded by the dialogue participants at the Yaoundé Conference Center. That will be it for Political News Review this week.
Charles Tembe with our press review. The major national dialogue to address the crisis rocking the northwest and southwest regions of Cameroon has ended in Yaoundé with a number of proposals forwarded to the head of state for consideration. The proposals adopted fall within the mandate of the 8 commissions set up for the major national dialogue chaired by Prime Minister Joseph John Gute. Sam Bukuba sums up the main proposals from the meeting in the following report.
The resolutions of the 5-day major national dialogue were eagerly anticipated and none more so than those of the Committee of Decentralization and Local Development. Mr. Felix Mbayu read the final report of the dialogue.
The endowment of the Northwest and Southwest regions with a special status in conformity with Section 62 sub 2 of the Constitution, which states that the law may take into account the specificities of certain regions with regards to their organization and functioning. The effective and accelerated putting in place of the regions, the disbursement of special allocation to each of the councils in the Northwest and Southwest to facilitate the effective return to certain agglomerations, the suppression of the provision for the appointment of government delegates provided for within the special regime applicable to certain agglomerations, a substantial reduction of the powers of supervisory authorities.
A member of the Committee of Decentralization and Local Development, Mr. David Abuema Choi, gives perspectives on the special status recommended for the Northwest and Southwest regions, where the clamor had been for federalism to resolve the Anglophone crisis, now into its third year.
We fought for that. We have our historical background. We have our management culture. We have this culture of accountability and all that. I think people want to see that back again in the content of this special status. People were fighting for more autonomy, the free management of their own affairs, subsidiarity, and all that can be put into this special content.
The chair of the National Dialogue, Prime Minister Chief Dr. John Gute, in his closing remarks said the resolutions, which, according to him, were in tune with the aspirations of the people, will have to seek presidential assent.
Our task was to examine, within the confines of the Constitution, likely ways and means of responding to the profound aspirations of our brothers and sisters of the Northwest and Southwest regions, and those of the other components of our great nation. The general report we have just followed, the fruit of a collective endeavor, brings out a good number of these aspirations. I am pleased to note that these aspirations have been coined as recommendations, which will be submitted for the consideration of the head of state at the end of our proceedings.
The Prime Minister further hammered on the core message of peace, saying the return of peace in the Northwest and Southwest was the business of all and sundry.
The informed proposals made during these past 5 days can only be truly implemented in a climate of peace and security. I therefore take the advantage of this forum and all your well-meaning contributions to renew the head of state's peace offer to all compatriots, and particularly those who have chosen to resort to blind violence and terror to assert their opinions. Re-echoing the President of the Republic, let me repeat to them that the path they have chosen is a blind alley. It is within the Republic of our country that we will find the place for their happiness and their fulfillment. I also urge the participants of this major national dialogue to be true ambassadors of peace, both within and outside our country. The return of peace and tranquility in these two regions cannot rest exclusively with the head of state, the government, or a few socio-political organizations. It is a matter for all Cameroonians and for each Cameroonian.
The badly needed peace will provide the propitious climate for normal activities to resume and thrive in the English-speaking regions, says the spokesperson of the National Dialogue, Dr. George Wane.
The major national dialogue was convened to create enabling conditions for our return to normalcy in the Northwest and the Southwest regions of Cameroon. Children need to go back to school. Refugees and internally displaced persons need to return to their homes and their villages. Populations need to resume their social and economic activities in total safety.
And the matter of safety, as well as the resolutions arrived at the National Dialogue, will now be put to the real test.
Sam Bukuba. The proposals, as highlighted by Sam there, carry a lot of good intentions to tackle the violent conflict in the northwest and southwest regions. But much of it depends on what the head of state makes of the recommendations and their effective implementation on the ground. And to read meaning and perspective into the outcome of the major national dialogue, I talked to Dr. Simon Munzu, who chaired the commission that brainstormed on how to reconstruct the affected zones. I first wanted to know in what frame of mind he was leaving Yaoundé for the southwest region.
So I'm going back to the southwest, satisfied that at least the entire nation, through this major national dialogue, has turned its attention to the proper assessment of the level of destruction, suffering, damage that our people have had to endure for these past 3 years. Until now, the information that we were getting was rather patchy, but within the framework of this special program of reconstruction, I would in fact say recovery and development, there's going to be more focused analysis of the situation, assessment of the needs, and implementation of targeted programs to respond to those needs.
What do you have in mind in terms of recovery or reconstruction of the northwest and southwest regions?
In this regard, the commission that I chaired identified 3 types of intervention. The first series consists of measures that need to be taken which would produce immediate results and address the immediate needs of the inhabitants of the affected areas. For example, where schools have been destroyed in terms of classrooms and all of that, they will need to be rebuilt, refurbished, depending upon the degree of destruction. Same goes for medical facilities in our rural communities. The same goes for people's homes that were destroyed in villages, including those that were razed completely to the ground, something that we have been deploring and decrying these past 3 years. We know that in some rural communities, even bridges that link villages were cut, they were destroyed, making it impossible now to go from one village to another in those same localities. In some places, it was the water supply that was interfered with, vandalized, and so on. So again, the communities in those areas would need to have their water supply restored. In other words, there are needs that are fundamental to people leading a normal life as a return to the communities that they left, either as internally displaced persons or as refugees for those who went to Nigeria. But in addition to that, there is another range of projects to be implemented in those same 3 regions, the accomplishment of which may take a longer time. The ones in the first category will fix a maximum implementation period of 2 years. They start immediately. Some of them can be completed in 6 months, some in 1 year, some in 3 months, but they have to be completed in maximum 2 years. Those in the second category also start immediately, but their implementation can take as long as 5 years because of their nature. In that category, we have things like the council roads that link the localities within a council. In category 3, we have projects that should start immediately also, but whose completion period may spread up to about 10 years, depending upon what needs to be accomplished. In that category, we place projects such as the construction of the deep sea port in Limbe, the pursuit and completion of construction of the ring road in the northwest. Basically, that's the plan that our commission came out with. We proceeded to identify some projects specifically, and some of these happened, in fact, to be projects that were already in the pipeline. Implementation had begun when the crisis forced them to stop. So if the security environment permits it, there is no reason why projects like that in implementation should not recommence immediately and produce results in the lives of our people.
Did you try to factor in the prevailing situation on the ground to know that these projects can only take off if peace returns to the affected regions?
No, absolutely. We are alive to the fact that what our commission proposed may not be achieved unless peace returns. I mean, you can't go constructing bridges if they're going to be destroyed again. You can't go trying to rehabilitate schools if the schools are going to be attacked and vandalized again. So I think the implementation of the reconstruction and development program presupposes that peace has returned to a degree that allows these activities to be conducted. However, don't forget that our commission was only one of 8, and there is a commission dealing with disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration, which was supposed to look at what needs to be done for security to be re-established in our communities. It's obvious that the implementation of the program activities that we propose in our own commission would depend very heavily on what is done pursuant to what the Commission on DDR proposed.
Were you also concerned about the funding that will go to the realization of these projects?
Yes, we were. We examined that aspect as well. And what we did basically was identify possible sources of funding. And in that respect, I have to say that the fact that about 10 members of government were part of our commission was of great help to us. I know that when the list of commission members was initially published, some people reacted negatively by saying the thing is packed with ministers and all of that. But within the framework, as our work went on, we saw the usefulness of the presence within the commission of these members of government who, with regards to their participation in the work of our commission, were not treated as members of government, but rather as resource persons. For example, the presence of the Minister of Public Works enabled us to get immediate information about the state of implementation of some of the road projects that were to be included in the program that we were proposing. The presence of the Minister of Agriculture in our commission gave us a perspective as well on the state of affairs in that area, whether it be in terms of the agro-industrial complexes like CDC and PAMOR, or with respect to small farmers or just even the individual cultivators. The presence of the Minister of Economy enabled us to see also how what we were proposing fits into the overall national development program, especially as the nation sets out to embark on phase 2 of the CSC. So in that respect, we identified possible sources of funding. The primary source, of course, is the state of Cameroon, but we also looked at the possibility of other donors making a contribution. For example, even in terms of national sources, we thought that the government could issue bonds. We thought that the government could partner with some private financial institutions to fund parts of this program and so on. So it is possible to mobilize resources from internal sources, governmental and non-governmental. And in addition to that, there are other sources of finance that may be placed at our disposal by Cameroon's international development partners.
If you are just tuning in, this is Political Focus, coming to you from the national station of the CRTV in Yaoundé. Our guest today is Dr. Simon Munzu, with whom we are discussing the conclusions of the major national dialogue to address the bloody crisis in the northwest and southwest regions. You are welcome back to Political Focus and to our discussion with Dr. Simon Munzu. You chaired the commission in charge of reconstruction, but you were not unaware of what was going on in the other commissions, especially the commissions that were dealing with issues directly linked to the current crisis. I'm thinking about the Commission on Decentralization. We understand that the 2 regions, if the proposals are adopted, will have a special status. What do you have in mind about that?
Well, let me say that the special status proposal, from what I gather, because I was not a member of that commission, represents a compromise. Because as you would expect, there were members of the commission for whom all that needed to be done was to accelerate, as they continue to say, the implementation of decentralization. In other words, without any differentiation with regard to the northwest and southwest regions. Against that, there were people who firmly proposed a return to federalism. The details as to whether it was to be of 2 states or 4 states or 10 states is secondary, but a return to federalism. And at a personal level, everybody knows that my position this past 30 years has been that of federalism as the most effective way of tackling the Anglophone problem. So from that perspective, this suggestion, this proposal to resort to Article 62, paragraph 2 of the Constitution to grant the Northwest and Southwest special status in conformity with the Constitution appeared to be a compromise between those two positions. Now, you would recall that I delivered a keynote address to the plenary of the dialogue on the opening day. I did indicate that while I firmly stand for federalism, we should not, in approaching this matter, be bogged down by words, by labels, because everything is in the content. So I would be keen to see what content the government gives to the notion of special status. If by virtue of recognizing that we have a special status, we are allowed a degree of autonomy which permits us effectively to govern our affairs, then at the end of the day, you would have had a federation without naming it federation. So I reserve my judgment on the specific significance of resort to this special status mechanism until I see the specific content. Let me just illustrate what I'm saying with an example. Like, we all know that the United Kingdom, as the name suggests, is a monarchy, which has as head of state the Queen. Tomorrow it could be a king. But again, we all know that the way in which the governance system of the United Kingdom functions is such that the Queen, so the monarch, does not participate directly in running the politics and the government of the country, of which she is head of state. And this is left in the hands of the cabinet, so the government, and the parliament in terms of the House of Lords and the House of Commons, which to some political analysts would correspond to a republican form of government. Yet, it is a monarchy. By contrast, in some countries, especially on our continent in Africa, you have countries that are described as republics, but which in practice, when you go and see the way in which the president and head of states exercise power, in some places, political scientists looking at that would say that power is exercised by one person and therefore it's rather more like a monarch. That person behaves more like a king or a queen, as the case may be, than as a constitutional president. So once again, this may be too, perhaps for some people who are impatient with analysis and drawing distinctions and so on, may find this too academic and technical, but believe me, it's quite simple. We need to judge what we have by the content, not by the label that is placed on it.
What will you say to those who have been quick to say that the Anglophones who are delegates to that major national dialogue have fallen even short of what those who went to Fumban achieved?
Yes, I mean, that's a legitimate criticism, I think. I mean, I have to say that in terms of the outcome, while I draw some comfort by the fact that the Anglophone problem was explicitly acknowledged to exist in this forum, which is not an insignificant achievement when you bear in mind that at the beginning of this crisis 3 years ago, there were people who were still living in denial of the Anglophone problem, including Anglophone ministers and other elite. So from that point of view, just recognizing that the problem exists has been a major breakthrough. However, in terms of what has come of it, my preference would have been for us to have an outright commitment to the federal system. I don't think that we should give up because we can still advocate, meditate, work towards the eventual institution of a federal form of government in Cameroon. So in terms of where we're coming from, what has been proposed represents a major step forward, even though it is only on the road to the destination that should finally take us to the federal system of government. And therefore, those who are quick to say that we are worse off than in Fumban, I pointed out just to express my regret that indeed we came to Yaoundé in this dialogue. I mean, we, the population of the Northern and Southwest, far less prepared than those who went to Fumban were. And yet we sit back in our analysis and we say that those who went to Fumban went in disarray, they did not prepare. I'm sorry to say that we came to this major national dialogue with the Anglophones, came even less well prepared. And it is because there was a risk that this may happen that some of us, and I in particular, right from the beginning of this crisis, advocated the convening of a national dialogue on the Anglophone problem, which we said must be preceded by a preparatory conference of Anglophones, which later on we named as the Anglophone General Conference. I continue to regret that pressure from both the separatists and the government, the two conspired to make sure that the Anglophone General Conference did not take place. And now we have, in a way, paid the price for that because we came to Yaoundé without the Anglophones having worked out a common position. And it is a matter of regret that in the participation in the work of the dialogue, Anglophones put in their contributions as individuals. Although when it came to the form of the state, yes, there were many Anglophones who are federalists. So while speaking only for themselves individually, they spoke the same language. And I suppose there are Anglophones who are unitarists. While speaking on the subject, they spoke individually, but also with the same language with respect to their own position. So I hope that we draw a lesson from this and see that we don't each time put ourselves in a position where we're not able to bargain effectively because we did not prepare adequately.
Don't you see that this is a bit paradoxical because the Prime Minister in his closing speech said that 2/3 of the over 600 participants were from the Northwest and Southwest. With the numbers, they could not get what they wanted.
No, why would you consider that paradoxical? To begin with, the 2/3 you're talking about were not all in the Commission on Decentralization. That is where the actual discussion took place. But even assuming that in that commission, 2/3 of the members were Anglophones, none of us is pretending that all Anglophones are federalists. Number one. Number two, the truth remains that even given that Anglophones were a majority in each commission, any Anglophone who asked to speak was speaking basically in his own name and expressing just his own opinion. Whereas again, had we had the opportunity to meet in a pre-national dialogue preparatory conference, we would have sorted out many things, adopted a common position on several issues, and on arrival at the national dialogue, it would have been a matter of simply putting those positions on the table and saying that this is what we, the people of the Northwest and Southwest, want. But we lost that opportunity, and now I have to say we're more or less paying the price for it.
You will be going back to the region to try to sell the conclusions or the proposals of the major national dialogue to the populations out there. How do you intend to go about it?
Well, that's a hypothetical question because I'm not aware that we have received any particular commission to go and explain anything to anyone. Obviously, when you meet Southern Cameroonians, Anglophones, if you prefer, in conversation like you and I are having now, I have to explain my understanding of what is going on, what is intended. But in terms of having a specific brief to go out there and explain anything to anyone, I don't think we have been commissioned to do that.
While the major national dialogue was going on, you were not unaware of the activities of those who were on the other side, I mean the separatists, their activities on the field and their activities out of the country. How do you reconcile their activities and the outcome of this major national dialogue?
Let's put it this way. The people whom you refer to had said from the very beginning that they were not interested in this dialogue for various reasons. And therefore, no one expected them to stop their own activities just because people who believed in the dialogue were meeting in Yaoundé. So I am not surprised that they continue, carry on their activities, regardless of what was happening in Yaoundé. However, it is clear that for the conditions to be created which favor a return to normal life for our population, the two sides are going to have to find some common ground. And the initiative for that remains with the two sides. And by the two sides here, I mean the government on the one hand and the separatists on the other. The rest of us are the third force, as it were, caught in the middle. In the middle, what needs to be discussed has been discussed. We would all have wished that this was discussed with the participation of all the stakeholders, so that whatever comes of it will be considered as being binding on everyone. But unfortunately, because of the failure of the separatists to respond favorably to the invitation that they received to attend this conference, they can say that they were not part of the conference and therefore not bound by the outcome. Nevertheless, I believe that they and the government are going to continue to engage and to negotiate. So let's hope.
According to you, what will be the way forward to bringing back normalcy to the Northwest and Southwest regions?
Well, I mean, what is responsible for the unsatisfactory situation that we have now? It's armed violence. And we see that that violence has two major protagonists. There are the government armed forces on the one hand and the separatist armed groups on the other. and the rest of us are caught in between. So we can't pretend that normalcy can return if armed hostility does not end. And the best way to end the armed hostility is for the two fighting forces and the political leadership behind them to sit around the table, agree on modalities for a ceasefire, and eventually work out a solution that would entail the end of hostilities across the northern and southwest so that people can resume their normal lives. Now, I am a civil society actor, a civilian, not privy to what the warring factions want or what they can do or what they can compromise on, so I'm not in the best position to answer your question. I can only hope that, just like you and every other Cameroonian citizen, we would look to those two armed protagonists, recognizing that our people have suffered enough, that peace should return, and that for peace to return, they have to cease fire and eventually lay down their arms so that the military should return to the normal scale of military presence, police presence, gendarmerie presence anywhere in the country.
Dr. Simon Munzu, you were one of the key actors in this Anglophone problem. I remember from AAC 1 to AAC 2 and now the major national dialogue. Does it mean that somewhere along the line you've abandoned your initial stance and now you are in the middle?
No, in terms of stance, I remain committed to my initial stance, which is putting an end to the marginalization, the domination, the assimilation, the takeover of southern Cameroon and its people, such as we have witnessed with intensity these past 30 to 40 years, passes through the return of Cameroon to a federal system of government. That remains my position. But I also recognize that in a situation of this kind, you cannot adopt a policy of, if I don't have everything, I won't accept anything. So I think the outcome of this dialogue is that we have received something. We accept that, see what it actually means, and if it is not what we were given to understand it is, we would know what to do once we make that determination. But I think it would be a wrong attitude to just dismiss everything outright and say that the major national dialogue was a waste of time. It was an exercise of just the CPDM talking to itself, as some people have tried to portray it. That's not what it was, at least not in the commission that I chaired, where sometimes discussions were quite heated without being hostile. People were very forthright in the way they express themselves. So I think we Cameroonians have got to stop acting from the standpoint of perpetually distrusting each other, condemning each other, suspecting each other, imputing motives that are not there, etc. I think we should learn to be more positive in our approach to the examination and eventual resolution of national issues.
Dr. Simon Munzu, it was a pleasure to have you as guest on the program Political Focus.
Thank you very much, Samson. It was my pleasure to be with you, and I thank you for having me as your guest.
That was Dr. Simon Munzu, head of the Commission for the Reconstruction of the Northwest, Southwest, and Far North regions during the major national dialogue in Yaoundé. And that is where we will conclude today's edition of Political Focus. The production team included Sam Bukuba, Charles Tembe, and Nelson Tawe. Our sound technicians was Breeze Song, while Wayne Paul Ngam was in charge of supervision. Remember that you can listen to Political Focus at your convenience by logging on to YouTube. For presentation in Yaoundé, I have been Samson Websey, thanking you for listening.